I call Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I rise to take a brief call on this committee of the whole House as we debate the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Bill. It's a brief call, Mr Chair, because in a material sense not a whole lot has changed since we debated the second reading. And during that debate, Mr Chair, I gave notice that New Zealand First would be seeking to have the bill either withdrawn or sent back to the Select Committee for re-examination in the light of what is effectively a new age since it was first introduced to the House. Mr Chairman, New Zealand First opposes this bill, but we might be persuaded to support it if it were returned to Select Committee, where it might be able to be refurbished, as it were, in line with everything that's changed since the 49th Parliament first considered it back in 2009. And I say that, Mr Chairman, because as it stands, this bill is simply a mess. I go back to what the Honourable Dr Richard Worth said about it during the first reading. On the 5th of March 2009, quote, "This bill has no fewer than 58 clauses covering 17 items." Well, it did, Mr Chairman, but it doesn't now. And I look at the supplementary order papers relating to it, and of the two that have survived, between them they cover no fewer than 21 of those clauses, which are variously amended or deleted altogether. And there'll be more, Mr Chairman. Of that we can be quite certain. Passing this bill in its present form, even with the SOPs as they laid out, after the passage of so many years, with the loss of all the institutional knowledge and memory of all the fine members who were on that original Select Committee, who have now long since departed this House, will only cause as many problems as it solves. And when I suggested during the second reading that the bill be withdrawn on the grounds there was nothing so pressing as to require its passing, given the lack of priority that had been afforded it over these last 6 years, that drew the ire of some of the members from the government side who proclaimed rather indignantly that it was important to the people whose lives it had the potential to affect. And Mr Parker obviously touched on that. Well, I mean, that may be so, but obviously not so important to the government that they have been bothered to do anything about it, for the equivalent of 2 entire terms of Parliament, Mr Chair. And now that they're finally going to, it's a safe bet. 15 will get you 20. They're going to get it wrong. And I say that because of the sheer number of inconsistencies with existing legislation as it has evolved over the years while this bill has languished on the back burner. And some of them we examined earlier. Some are addressed by the SOPs that we have before us. And I say again, there's going to be more. Mr Chairman, I say to the House, send this bill back to the Select Committee and let's make sure we have everything right before we pass it into law and then discover all the things that remain wrong with it. Because when that happens, we'll be revisiting it again anyway. Mr Chair, I say to the House, is it not more sensible and a better use of the taxpayer's coin, better in the long run for the people whose lives are going to be affected by it, to get it right once and for all, rather than just close our eyes and press the button and hope, knowing that in all probability there will be issues still unresolved and problems unsolved and things left uncorrected in what is now a rather tatty and outdated bill. Mr Chairman, my erstwhile colleague, the Honourable Damien O'Connor, is actually the last man standing from the Primary Production Select Committee of the 49th Parliament, who essentially brought us this far. Everybody else who had input into this bill is gone. Their knowledge, their memory is not available to us. So, Mr Chairman, we've touched on, in previous elements of this debate, we've touched on the Auckland Art Gallery, the volcanic cones, the Lookout Point Reserve in Oamaru, Dunedin Octagon, the Port Chalmers Bowling Club and the Otago Aero Club. And these new SOPs include matters pertaining to the Wairau Hospital site East End, the Marlborough District Picton Office land, the Mahinapua Bay Reserve, some other reserve land in the far north district near Opua, and the Waikimete Cemetery in West Auckland. So by my basic maths, Mr Chairman, that's something like 11 of the 17 original items heralded by the good Dr Worth, and 21 of the original clauses, which are either amended in some way or deleted altogether. And there'll be more. I'll bet the farm on it. In fact, I'd bet the average national member's mortgage on it if, in fact, I was certain that they even had one. So I say, Mr Chairman, I ask the House once again, for the sake of the people who this government concedes may be affected by this bill, whose lives may be affected by it, let's get it right. Let's send this thing back to the Primary Production Select Committee, or indeed another committee altogether, and have a fresh set of eyes across it. Because 6 years is a long time, Mr Chairman, and another 6 months to ensure that all the bugs are actually ironed out is probably a worthwhile investment under the circumstances. As things stand, New Zealand First cannot support this bill for the simple reason that we believe it will still contain undiscovered mistakes, and we do not believe it is responsible for Parliament to simply rubber stamp legislation into law with our eyes clamped shut and our fingers in our ears just to make the thing go away. Mr Chairman, if this thing is going to be done at all, it needs to be done right. The way to ensure that is to let a new set of eyes go over it, bring it up to date and make sure that we're not simply making things worse. New Zealand First does not support this bill.